already know.
Okay, I hope I'm not on mute. Can you please confirm, Kelly? And I have shared my screen where it is showing a blank slide at the time.
Yes, can hear
Okay,
and see you.
that's great. Thank you. So let's begin. I will minimize my Teams window and open my slides. So thank you so much, everyone. It is really an honor for me to be with the few people to whom I have been following and interacting virtually. It's an honor, really, for me. Today, in Washington, D.C. chapter meeting, I'm presenting Dynamics 365 performance tips and best practices. My name is Yawer Iqbal, and let's begin with the topic. Basically, this presentation is a smaller version on a bigger subject, and basically I will be going through. And the reason for this presentation is basically I feel in many projects this is an area, no matter we are developers or consultant, just functional or technical, sooner or later if we are serving a client, we have to be dealing with performance. So this is an area where I want to explore further, get more expertise and share with community. Before proceeding further, I think usually I would be introducing myself. Since I have already done, I will be very brief. I already mentioned, I'm living in Melbourne, Australia, and I've been working with Microsoft products and I'm involved with some community work. Usually with every presentation, I encourage people if they like to participate and tell other peoples about user group or whatever event we are in. Usually I try to encourage people. If anyone like, please feel free. These will be the Power Platform and MS Dynamics 365 will be the hashtags, or please use hashtag specific to Washington DC user group chapter. Performance basics, usually performance is not a sort of known functional requirement, and I don't want to go into theoretical details what performance is, but generally, if we get feedback, users say system is performing slow or they are experiencing system is taking a lot more time than expectation, usually we will consider it that there can be a performance issue. And the only thing to keep in mind is by slow performance, it doesn't always mean the whole system is performing poor. It can be just maybe one form or a couple of forms or just a few queries which may be performing slow. So we will need to like distinguish, is it overall slow performing system or just a few components are not performing as per expectation. Another thing is slow performance can be situational as well. I know last year I was working with a client and they were luckily good in a way. They promote people. They were flexible with their working arrangements, and they promote people if they want to work from home. And but working from home really that was a headache because accessing Dynamics 365 from home, it was really a pain. Just opening a form, it took maybe 5 to 10 seconds, and that was a reason maybe people. And that is a good example, like sort of situational issues about performance. Why system performs slow? Unfortunately, there is not a single reason for that. This tip I just learned from fast track training. Sometimes users can be experiencing slowness in performance due to they are far from data centers. And the thing is, basically, the users who will be using the applications, they need to be closer to data center, and it can be figured out. The other category, or the sort of group of reasons, is about infrastructure, and these can be multiple reasons. It can be some network relevant issues, slow internet, maybe bandwidth issue, or browser settings can be another issue. Similarly, sometime proxy servers and proxy settings can be contributing in that area. So if we found like there are issues relevant to slow performance of application, and if they are relevant to infrastructure, usually we need to work with IT team and work it out and figure out and improve the basic problem. The third category, or sort of third area, which is more relevant to us who are developers or consultants, slow performance can of application can be due to wrong maybe design decisions, maybe due to faulty architecture. There can there can be a lot of data which may be causing slowness in application, and it also can be due to some configurations. Many times, since we as a consultant, many times a few of us are working for a few of us are working with partners, and as a consultant in those roles, usually our role is we develop the system, deliver it, and usually move on. And that is the reason usually when we are developing, we don't face any performance issues, because that time not real data is there. But we need to consider performance, because if particularly we are considering end user as a center of our design and success of our project, and also a better performing system helps in adoption of of a application and project success overall. Being like Dynamics 365 and model driven apps, being when we are working with online, a general consideration is maybe being a SaaS offering, since they can scale automatically, so maybe we don't need to bother about performance or best practices. But the thing is, even scalability don't guarantee like poor design decisions will perform good. So that is a reason we still need to be consider performance in our practices. Last yesterday I was having a conversation. I joined Singapore virtual user group, and from there I learned like in in Singapore, actually this is a sort of trend, like more projects are happening on-prem. So when project is happening on-prem, I guess there are more reasons to be considered performance, because uh, it doesn't scale automatically as scalability is there in online. So so the thing is, overall performance has importance, and no matter we are on we our project is on prem or online, we need to consider and do our best to give our end users a better experience. Of course, we will need to consider performance when we found performance related issues, but while development, and particularly after data migrations, and from time to time after going live, I guess these should be the stages when we should be considering to review performance as well. Uh, in next a couple of slides, I will be sharing some of the tips as a reminder to follow. Some of these are Microsoft's recommendations. Excuse me. Some of these are Microsoft recommendations, and a few of them are just learnings from mistakes. And a disclaimer here is that I may not be covering all best practices, and the things which I am presenting here, they may not resolve every possible performance related issues. As I said, this is a a bigger subject, and basically it is just an effort to touch base and remind a few things. Uh, when we are considering forms for performance, it is really good. In most of the projects, unified user interface, people have adopted, projects have moved. So one of the benefits of unified interface is better performance. And I was seeing one of the studies by conducted by Microsoft, and some interesting statistics were that like with unified user interface, grid loads 63% faster or better, form load time was 37% improved, and overall application launch time was 27%. There was 27% improvement in app launch time. So if we still have some legacy project or legacy user interface, probably it should not be delaying further. About designing forms, a general rule is our forms should not have anything unwanted or unused, and it includes many things, and like our forms should not have any extra or unwanted fields, no extra ribbon buttons. Business rules should be removed if they are not doing anything useful. Same is for business process flows. And another very relevant thing is JavaScript files. A few times, we know, like as a developer, sometimes there are challenging times, and we just need to complete tasks or wrap our projects a little sooner. So, but it is always a good idea to consider like our forms don't have unused or unwanted JavaScript files into it, and they are not loading every time with form. And similarly, like on load of form, we should not be executing any extra or unwanted scripts or functions. Generally, I have observed, and I hope many of you guys will agree. Like sometime when we are creating forms, we just copy existing form, copy it, paste it, and we started doing changes. This is usually a sort of opportunity when we miss things, and like that time usually we don't do audit. Okay, if there are a few JavaScript files attached, are they really being used? Next slide is about views, and the basic recommendation or suggestion is we should only have relevant columns in our views, but not only in our view columns should be relevant, but also find columns should be relevant too. And we should try to avoid joins in our views. And joins are, of course, if we are like accessing data from related entities, that is a join. But also like not only lookups, but also option sets also are something which bring join to a view. So when possible, we should try to avoid these. But of course, if it is a requirement, we have to go with it. And Microsoft recommend to avoid long text field in search. And long text fields can be things like comments, titles, body or description of a message, these sort of things. And last bit is uh, whenever required, we should try and apply indexing on our views. So yeah, and but also when after going live, we should consider and review our views and apply indexing where required. And another time when we should consider and test views for indexing is after data migration or data import. Plugins, a few things very quickly. We should try and avoid global variables because they are not thread safe. And probably a few things are very common, but just for as a reminder, retrieve all, these are some of those messages which are recommended not to be used. especially retrieve all, because they are not only slow, but they perform with every entity as well. And with Dynamics 365 Online, we know we have 2 minutes uh, time sandbox execution time where plugin can keep continue its execution, but it doesn't mean we want to keep our user waiting for 2 minutes. So wherever possible and it makes sense, please and consider using async plugins. One tip is many times we need to use images with our plugins, and with images we can select which fields should be contained in images. So if we don't need all fields, so basically we should only be selecting relevant fields in our image. And the last thing is, don't try to apply changes in post operation because it re-trigger a update. And if we need to update, probably we should be considering other stages for that. Next slide is about JavaScript, and in basically here, I'm not suggesting or something about JavaScript code. Just a few general recommendation or suggestions are: we should only load with our forms what is required. And second thing is, we should only execute something which is required. And whatever we are downloading, we can minify that and try to load it a little quicker and faster. I need to admit, I have been coding a few times where I was doing round trips, but later I found probably that is not that can be avoided just by hard coding, maybe sometime quid or a few IDs. I know maybe some people will say it is it some people may not like this idea, but I think my thinking is avoiding round trips is a better approach compared to like having something hard coded. About security, this is really an interesting area and very wide topic. A few suggestions are try to try to try to avoid making security model complex. And particular thing is, if possible, try to keep roles minimize, but of course whatever is necessary. Another consideration is we have organization owned entities and user and team owned entities. So if a user access data to a organization owned entity, it will be quicker compared to user or team owned entities. So if we don't need really a user or team owned entity, probably for the sake of performance we should consider organization owned. Next tip is about sharing feature and principal. Basically, when we are sharing a record with any user, in principal object access table, it creates a record to manage that access. So just we need to keep in mind, POA table can go can grow. It may not be overnight, but with the passage of time it can go quick, and it can cause some performance issues. A few scenarios which I want to discuss is, just imagine if in a call center situation, someone share a case with one of their team members. And now I know many people don't bother looking or changing their cascade rules. So usually sharing is usually cascade all. It means if a case has maybe 20 like to maybe overall 20 activities and child records, it means when that case is being shared for 20 activities and child records, and for the case overall 21 rows will be created in POA table. So we can imagine, I mean, this is something as a end user don't know, and many times as a consultant we don't consider what where it will be ending in last. But this is just an example, and just imagine if that case has to be shared with a couple of people. Of course, these roles will be being replicated, and if it has to be shared, better is to share it with a team, and more specifically access teams are better for sharing these sort of in these sort of situations. I don't have many things to say about queries, but generally just two tips. First is probably one of those things which, as a consultant or developer, usually one of those things which we learn first, and that is we should not be selecting all columns if we don't need. But still, I know in my experience, and I'm not sure if you will agree with this, many times still we see people using selecting all in their queries, and I mean it can it can slow down the queries. Jim is on call with us. I interviewed Jim, and one of the question I asked Jim was about performance. I really liked he was saying probably he don't use link for updates and creation of records, and that was really a great tip. When we are querying data, there are we know we have multiple mechanisms to query data, and link is really a sort of preference, and many people like to code using link. The only thing is, in sort of situations when we want to create a record or update, it performs slow. Fetch XML can be generated as well, and a few people don't prefer using fetch XML because it is just a sort of string, and we don't know if something is broken until or unless code is being executed. I mean, everything has pros and cons, but the thing is, fetch XML is faster in execution, and link compare a little slow. So always, if you are working with a task or something where we need to consider performance, maybe we can consider using fetch XML for fetching data. And this brings me to the pretty much last section, which I'm discussing a few tools which we can use to monitor and improve performance. First one is about principal object access table. In XRM toolbox, we have a plugin available, and that specifically queries and give details about POA table. So this can be used if we need to query and check what sort of data is we have in POA table, or if we want to experiment how sharing is affecting. Dynamics 365 diagnostics is another really nice tool. It executes a few tests, and most important among these is latency test. Latency is basically time it takes for a signal to travel from one end to other end, and Dynamics 365 diagnostics, it executes, I guess, on overall 20 tests, and the excuse me, result summary is basically average of 20 tests, execution of 20 tests. And about latency, Microsoft's recommendation is it is acceptable if latency is up to or under 150 milliseconds. This result which I'm showing is it is just sort of vanilla instance where there is no customization or further configuration have been done. So the lower latencies, better it is. So this is also one of the things we can test and ensure like our overall architecture is working fine. Performance Center, it is also built-in sort of tools. We can use Performance Center to see, like in our form, which components are taking more time to download. It shows separately components like iframes or fields or maybe subgrids, and we can see, okay, this is overall form and which subcomponents are taking more time. And this way we can try to fine tune and like see which particular components are taking more time to load. Next is Fiddler. Probably anyone who has a developer background will have used Fiddler. I just want to mention additional thing which we can find from Fiddler is caching details. We can see like which components or which forms are being cached. And this is the last slide in my presentation. Solution checker, like it is not specific for performance, but solution checker execute for against a few rules and verify and give a sort of reports with some suggestions and improvements, not only for our web resources, but I guess even for plugins as well. And that was pretty much all which I was aiming to present today. Thank you all for being here, and here are my connection details. I will love to connect if we are not connected already. And with that, I will say thanks. And it was really an honor for me. And I will try to answer if there are any questions, but I hope in forum we have many great minds. So please feel free. And if there is any question, feel free to ask. Thank you so much.
Thank you. This was great and really helpful. There was one question. Can you talk a little bit about the indexing for the online environment versus the on-prem environment? So that was from your views section, I think.
I have not worked a lot with Kelly about on-premises systems. My apologies, I may not be able to give some specific insights about that. But the thing is, we have, I think it is, I can't remember what is exact, but for views, we have some, I think it is, we can apply indexing from our environment. Maybe it is data, some, I'm sorry, I'm missing name. I will just type in the chat soon. We
Okay.
can we can see like which areas are maybe system is considering Dynamics 365 application is considering maybe slow performing, and we can using that we can apply indexing, and if it is not working well, we can remove that later as well. My apologies, the name is not coming into my mind, but I will just check and type back in chat window.
Cool, cool. And Jim was asking if the online tools you shared, can you share the links to those guys?
Sure. I will include in my chat, and will also maybe include in slide as well.
Perfect. Yeah. And for everyone listening in, after I get these slides, I'll get them uploaded in the crmug.com/Washington chapter page. So they'll be uploaded there for everyone to get them. And we had another question come in from Philip. So alternate keys will create, oh, not a question, a comment. Alternate keys will create a unique index, but I'm not sure if they improve the performance. Yes. Good comment. I think also now with your quick find views, your find columns create indexes and things like that, but I think there's some things to be careful in there too, right?
Yep.
Any other questions from people? All right. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording, and then we'll restart it again with our next presentation.